The morning of my wedding, I stood in my childhood bedroom staring at an empty dress bag. My sister Natasha sat on my bed, casually filing her nails like she hadn't just destroyed my entire world. "You can't be serious," I whispered, my hands shaking as I held up the empty garment bag that should have contained my grandmother's vintage wedding dress. "Oh, Kelly, don't be so dramatic. It's just a dress." Natasha didn't even look up from her manicure. Besides, Marcus deserves a bride who actually looks stunning on their wedding day. What she didn't know was that in exactly 4 hours, I would be walking down that same aisle, but not to marry the man she thought I would.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up as Natasha's younger sister meant living in a perpetual state of second place. While I spent my evenings working part-time jobs to pay for community college, Natasha effortlessly glided through Stanford on our parents' dime. Where I struggled to maintain a B average while juggling 3 different shifts at local restaurants, she graduated summa cum laude with barely cracking a textbook. "Kelly, sweetie, why can't you be more like your sister?" became our mother's favorite refrain. It echoed through family dinners, graduation ceremonies, and every milestone that mattered. Natasha had inherited our mother's striking features: the high cheekbones, the perfectly straight blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, and those piercing blue eyes that could convince anyone of anything. I got our father's more modest genes: average height, mousy brown hair that required significant effort to look presentable, and hazel eyes that people politely called interesting. But what hurt more than the physical comparisons were the assumptions about our characters. Natasha was the smart one, the ambitious one, the one destined for greatness. I was sweet Kelly, the reliable one, the one who tries so hard. Those qualifying words, sweet, reliable, tries hard, felt like consolation prizes for existing in her shadow. The pattern continued into our 20s. Natasha landed a coveted position at Goldman Sachs straight out of college, complete with a corner office and a salary that made our parents beam with pride. I worked my way up from receptionist to office manager at a small marketing firm downtown, a job that barely covered my student loans and the rent on my studio apartment in Queens. When Natasha announced her engagement to Marcus Wellington, heir to Wellington Industries and one of New York's most eligible bachelors, our parents threw an engagement party that resembled a small wedding. 200 guests, champagne that cost more per bottle than I made in a week, and endless toasts about how Natasha had married up and secured the family's social standing. I stood in the corner that night, wearing a dress I'd bought on clearance 6 months earlier, watching my sister accept congratulations from people who wouldn't remember my name if their lives depended on it. Marcus, to his credit, was charming and handsome in that practiced way wealthy men learned from birth. He said all the right things, laughed at all the right moments, and looked at Natasha like she was the only woman in the room. "Isn't it wonderful?" my mother gushed, cornering me by the dessert table. "Finally, one of my daughters is marrying well. Now, Kelly, you really should take notes. At 26, you can't afford to be picky much longer." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to lodge themselves deep in my insecurity. I watched couples around me, college friends posting engagement photos on social media, coworkers planning baby showers, former classmates buying houses in the suburbs. Meanwhile, I was still sharing grocery store sushi with my on-and-off boyfriend Derek, whose idea of a romantic evening involved splitting the check at Applebee's. Derek Thompson was, in my mother's generous description, a work in progress. He'd been almost finishing his electrician's apprenticeship for 3 years, had strong opinions about which video games deserved awards, and possessed an impressive ability to find problems with every job opportunity that came his way. But he was mine, and after years of watching Natasha collect achievements like trophies, having someone, anyone, who chose me felt like enough. Our relationship had that comfortable, low-stakes quality of 2 people who'd settled for each other. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party 2 years earlier, bonded over being the least successful people in the room, and drifted into coupledom through a series of casual hangouts that gradually became routine. Derek was easy to be around, undemanding, and refreshingly unimpressed by my sister's accomplishments. "She's kind of uptight, don't you think?" he'd said after meeting Natasha at a family barbecue. Like, who needs to check their phone that much during a cookout? I loved him a little more in that moment for seeing her as anything less than perfect. So when Derek finally proposed on a random Tuesday evening in my apartment, no ring, no planning, just a sudden, "Hey, we should probably get married or whatever," I said yes immediately. Not because my heart soared or because I couldn't imagine life without him, but because it felt like my turn. Finally, something that was mine first. The engagement announcement at Sunday family dinner generated the expected responses. Natasha squealed with what seemed like genuine excitement, though I caught her exchanging a quick glance with our mother. Dad gave Derek a firm handshake and made jokes about keeping me in line. Mom smiled tightly and immediately began discussing realistic budgets and managing expectations. "Small ceremonies can be so intimate," she said, already mentally comparing it to the extravaganza being planned for Natasha's upcoming nuptials. "There's something to be said for keeping things simple." Simple, that word followed me through the next 6 months as I planned a wedding with a budget that wouldn't cover the flowers for Natasha's bridal shower. While she tasted cakes from elite Manhattan bakeries, I comparison shopped at Costco. While she toured venues in the Hamptons, I booked the community center where I'd attended countless bake sales and school plays. But I had one thing that made it all worthwhile: our grandmother's wedding dress. Grandma Rose had been the family rebel, the daughter who'd married for love instead of money, and somehow made it work. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of 1950s craftsmanship: ivory silk with delicate pearl beading, a fitted bodice that emphasized the waist, and a full skirt that made anyone feel like royalty. When she passed away 5 years earlier, she had specifically left the dress to me in her will. "For Kelly," the document read, "who has her grandfather's kind heart and will wear this with the love it was meant to represent." Natasha had been furious, not because she wanted the dress, vintage wasn't her style, but because for once I'd been chosen first. She'd contested the will briefly, arguing that as the elder daughter, she deserved first pick of all heirlooms. When that failed, she'd spent months making subtle comments about how the dress would be wasted on a small wedding and how she should consider preserving it for someone who would do it justice. I'd kept the dress safely stored at our parents' house, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper and sealed in a climate-controlled closet. Every few months, I'd visit it, carefully unfolding the layers to admire the intricate beadwork and imagine how I'd look walking down the aisle. It was the one part of my wedding that felt truly special, truly mine. In the morning, everything changed like any other day. I'd spent the night at my parents' house. Tradition dictated that the bride and groom shouldn't see each other before the ceremony. Derek was presumably at his bachelor party hangover with his 2 groomsmen. I had 4 hours to transform myself from ordinary Kelly into someone worthy of wearing Grandma Rose's masterpiece. I'd been looking forward to this moment for months: the quiet ritual of getting ready, the symbolic transition from single woman to bride. My best friend's Pharrell was supposed to arrive at noon to help with my hair and makeup. My mother had promised to be there for the dress fitting, one of the few moments I'd imagined we might share something approaching mother-daughter intimacy. Instead, I found Natasha in my childhood bedroom, sitting cross-legged on my pink comforter like she owned the space. The dress bag lay empty beside her, its zipper gaping open like a wound. "Where is it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "Where's what?" She examined her perfect manicure with theatrical innocence. "My dress, Natasha, Grandma's dress. Where is it?" She sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonably difficult. "Oh, that old thing. I borrowed it." "Borrowed it?" My voice cracked. "Today? On my wedding day?" Marcus and I decided to move up our ceremony. His grandmother is quite ill, and we wanted her to be there. The venue had a last-minute cancellation, so we're getting married this afternoon instead of next month. She stood up, smoothing her silk pajamas. "The dress looks absolutely stunning on me, by the way, much better than it would have on you." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off.
The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just the theft, but the complete dismissal of my feelings, my day, my one chance to feel special. "You can't do this," I whispered. "It's my wedding day." "And it's my dress now. Technically, I should have inherited it anyway as the eldest daughter. Besides, you'll barely have 30 people at your little community center thing. I'll have 200 guests at the plaza. Which event do you think Grandma would want her dress to be remembered for?" That's when I heard the footsteps on the stairs, my mother's voice calling up cheerfully about starting the preparations. The sound of my wedding day began while I stood there in my pajamas, staring at the empty space where my dreams had been hanging just hours before. My mother appeared in the doorway carrying a garment bag and a cup of coffee, her face glowing with the particular excitement mothers reserve for wedding days. She stopped mid-step when she saw my expression. "Kelly, honey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "She took it," I managed, pointing at the empty bag. "Natasha took Grandma's dress." Mom's eyes darted between us, clearly hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. "Took it where, sweetheart?" "To her own wedding," Natasha said, checking her phone. "Marcus and I are getting married at 3 o'clock today, at the plaza. His grandmother flew in unexpectedly from Switzerland, and she's quite frail, so we couldn't wait another month." The coffee cup slipped from my mother's hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. Brown liquid splattered across my childhood rug, the one with the faded unicorns that I'd begged for when I was 7. "Today?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "But Kelly's wedding is today." "I know, it's terrible timing," Natasha said with mock sympathy. "But you understand, don't you? Marcus's family is so important, and his grandmother specifically asked to see me in a proper wedding dress. I couldn't disappoint her by wearing something off the rack." "So you stole mine instead?" The words came out louder than I intended, years of suppressed resentment finally breaking through. "I didn't steal anything. I borrowed a family heirloom that frankly was wasted sitting in a closet. Besides, Derek won't know the difference. Men never notice these things." My mother stood frozen in the doorway, and I watched her face cycle through emotions: shock, disappointment, and then something that looked disturbingly like calculation. I knew that look. It was the same expression she'd worn when deciding which of my school events to skip for Natasha's academic competitions. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we could postpone Kelly's ceremony." "No!" The word exploded out of me with a force that surprised everyone, including myself. "Absolutely not." "Kelly, be reasonable," Mom said in her practiced peacekeeping tone. "The plaza is impossible to book. Do you know how many strings Marcus had to pull? And his family has already traveled from Europe." "I don't care about Marcus's family," I shouted. "I don't care about the plaza or Switzerland or any of it. This is my wedding day." Natasha rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Kelly. Your wedding is at a community center with a potluck reception. Half your guests are probably relieved they don't have to sit through that amateur hour." "At least my fiancé actually wants to marry me," I shot back. "How many times has Marcus postponed your engagement? 3? 4? For the first time, Natasha's composure cracked slightly. "That's completely different. He's been busy with the European expansion." "Right. Too busy for the woman he supposedly loves, but suddenly available when his grandmother snaps her fingers." "Girls, please," Mom interjected, but neither of us was listening anymore. "You're just jealous," Natasha hissed, "because I'm marrying someone who actually matters, someone with a future, not some wannabe electrician who plays video games all day." "Derek may not be perfect, but at least he chose me. Marcus is marrying you because his family thinks you're suitable breeding stock for their dynasty." "How dare you?" "Enough." My mother's voice cut through our argument like a blade. "Natasha, you cannot take your sister's wedding dress on her wedding day. It's unconscionable." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Finally, someone was standing up for me. "However," Mom continued, and my heart sank, "perhaps we could work something out.
Kelly, what if we postpone your ceremony just a few weeks? Give Natasha time to find her own dress for her situation, and then you could have Grandma's dress for your rescheduled wedding. Her situation? I stared at my mother in disbelief. You mean her wedding? At the plaza? To a billionaire? The wedding that apparently takes precedent over everything else in this family? That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. The clarity was devastating. It's exactly what you meant. Because Natasha's wedding matters and mine doesn't. Because her happiness is worth more than mine. Because she's always been worth more than me. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Babe, the guys are asking if we're still on for today. Jake's mom wants to know if she should make the potato salad. Can you confirm? The mundane reality of my small wedding hit me like a physical blow. Derek's 2 friends, my 3 college roommates, our immediate families, and about 20 other people who'd carved out a Saturday afternoon for Kelly and Derek's modest ceremony. No one would reschedule European travel plans. No one had flown across oceans. If I postpone, some people might not bother to come at all. I need air, I said, pushing past both of them toward the stairs. Kelly, wait, Mom called after me. Let her go, Natasha said dismissively. She needs time to process. Once she realizes this is the mature solution, she'll come around. I stumbled down the stairs and out the front door, my pajamas inadequate against the October morning chill. The suburban street where I'd grown up looked the same as always. Neat lawns, sensible cars, the kind of middle-class stability that was supposed to be comforting. Instead, it felt suffocating. My phone rang. Sarah. Kelly, I'm running about 15 minutes late, but I've got everything, curling iron, makeup, that lipstick we picked out. Are you getting excited? I tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sob. Kelly, what's wrong? Through tears, I explained what had happened. Sarah listened in stunned silence. She didn't? Please tell me you're joking. I wish I was. Okay, first of all, what Natasha did is completely insane. Second, we're going to figure this out. Do you have any other dress options? Like what? The only nice dress I own is the bridesmaid's dress from your cousin's wedding, and it's purple. What about buying something today? With what money? I spent everything on the deposits for the venue and catering. I've got maybe $300 in my checking account. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What about postponing? I know it's awful, but maybe. No. The word came out harder than I intended. If I postpone, I'll never go through with it. Derek will find some excuse to put it off again. Mom will find 50 reasons why next month is better. And I'll spend the rest of my life as the woman who couldn't even manage to get married. Kelly, I'm getting married today, Sarah, in my pajamas if I have to. After I hung up, I sat on the front steps of my childhood home, watching neighbors go about their Saturday morning routines. Mrs. Patterson from next door waved cheerfully as she retrieved her newspaper, probably having no idea that the Rodriguez family was imploding just 20 feet away.
My phone buzzed again. Derek, getting worried here. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Because Josh just reminded me that his cousin's divorce cost him like 50 grand, so we should probably be sure about this whole thing. The casual way he mentioned divorce on our wedding day should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, it crystallized something I'd been avoiding for months. Derek wasn't marrying me because he couldn't imagine his life without me. He was marrying me because it seemed like the next logical step, the thing people our age were supposed to do, just like I was marrying him. The realization should have been devastating, but instead, it felt almost liberating. If we were both settling, if neither of us was getting the fairy tale, then maybe it didn't matter that my sister had stolen my dress. Maybe it didn't matter that my wedding would be forgettable and small. Maybe what mattered was admitting, finally, that I deserved better than settling. I stood up, my bare feet numb against the concrete steps, and walked back inside. Mom and Natasha were in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones that stopped the moment I appeared. Kelly, sweetheart, Mom began, we've been talking and we think... I'm calling off the wedding. I said. Both women stared at me. What? Natasha looked genuinely shocked. I'm calling it off. Derek and we're not right for each other. We both know it. I've been too scared to admit it, but this, I gestured toward the empty dress bag still lying on the counter, this made me realize I can't marry someone just because it's easier than being alone. My mother's face went through several expressions before settling on concern. Kelly, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Don't make any rash decisions. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, I said. Derek doesn't love me the way I deserve to be loved, and I don't love him the way he deserves either. We're both just comfortable. But the guests, Mom protested. The venue, the deposits. Can be dealt with. I looked directly at Natasha. Enjoy your stolen dress. I hope it brings you all the happiness you think you deserve. I started toward the stairs, then turned back. And Natasha, when Marcus inevitably divorces you because his family finds someone more suitable, remember this moment. Remember that you destroyed your sister's wedding day for a man who doesn't really want you either. The look on her face was worth every cent of the lost deposits. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, pulled out my phone, and started making the calls that would unravel my life as I knew it. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something instead of just settling for what was available. I had no idea that the best decision of my life would come from the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced. 3 hours later, I sat in Central Park wearing jeans and a hoodie, having successfully dismantled my entire life in a series of increasingly awkward phone calls. Derek had taken the news surprisingly well, admitting with relieved honesty that he'd been having doubts too. The venue manager was less understanding about the lost deposit, but I'd expected that. Sarah had insisted on meeting me, bringing coffee and the kind of fierce loyalty that reminded me why she'd been my best friend since freshman year of college. "So what now?" she asked, settling beside me on the bench overlooking the reservoir. "What does Kelly Rodriguez do next?" "I have absolutely no idea," I admitted. "For the first time in my life, I have no plan, no timeline, no expectations to meet. It's terrifying and kind of amazing." "Well, you could start by getting out of those clothes. You look like you're about to audition for a grunge band." I looked down at my hasty outfit choice. I grabbed the first things I could find. Everything else is either at the venue or in Derek's apartment, and I'm not ready to face either of those conversations yet. "Come on," Sarah said, standing up and pulling me with her. "We're going shopping. You just canceled your wedding and told off your entire family. You deserve something that makes you feel like the badass you apparently are." An hour later, we stood in Bloomingdale's, where Sarah had dragged me despite my protests about my extremely limited budget. She'd disappeared into the racks, emerging periodically with options that cost more than my monthly rent. "Sarah, I can't afford any of this," I said for the third time, fingering the price tag on a beautiful emerald dress that cost $800. "Just try it on. Sometimes you need to see what you look like to remember who you really are." The fitting room mirror was unforgiving in the harsh department store lighting, but the dress was undeniably stunning. The color brought out the green flecks in my hazel eyes, and the cut emphasized curves I usually hid under shapeless work clothes. For a moment, I could almost imagine being the kind of woman who belonged in a place like this. "Come out and show me," Sarah called. "I look ridiculous," I called back, but I stepped out anyway. "Holy shit," a male voice said from behind me. I spun around to find a man in an expensive suit standing near the men's department, a garment bag draped over his arm. He was tall, dark-haired, and handsome in a way that suggested personal trainers and dermatologists. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, deep brown and currently staring at me with unconcealed appreciation. "Excuse me?" I said, suddenly very aware that I was standing in public in a dress I couldn't afford. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping closer. "That was incredibly rude. You look absolutely stunning in that dress." Sarah appeared beside me, eyes wide. "Kelly, who is this?" "I have no idea," I said, not taking my eyes off the stranger.
Alexander Hawthorne, he said, extending his hand. And you are far too beautiful to be standing in a department store looking like someone stole your puppy. Kelly Rodriguez, I said automatically, shaking his hand. And what makes you think someone stole my puppy? The expression on your face when you were looking in that mirror, like you couldn't believe you deserved to wear something that gorgeous. His smile was warm and genuinely amused. Trust me, you deserve it and much more. Something about his confidence, the easy way he talked to strangers, reminded me of the world Natasha moved in. Let me guess, I said. You're rich, charming, and used to getting whatever you want. Alexander laughed, a sound that was more genuine than I'd expected. Guilty on the first 2 counts. The third, well, that depends on what I want. And what do you want right now? To buy you that dress. Both Sarah and I stared at him. I'm sorry, what? The dress. I'd like to buy it for you. Consider it an investment in seeing more women wear things that make them feel as confident as they look. Absolutely not, I said immediately. I don't even know you. Which is exactly why you should let me, he said with a grin. No strings, no expectations, just one stranger doing something nice for another stranger who clearly needs a reminder that good things can happen on bad days. Sarah elbowed me. Kelly, let the nice man buy you the dress. Sarah! What? You just canceled your wedding, your sister stole your grandmother's dress, and you're sitting in Central Park in your pajamas at 11 a.m. Let the universe throw you a bone. Alexander's expression shifted. Someone stole your wedding dress? A long story, I said quickly, and not one I'm sharing with a complete stranger, no matter how generous he's being. Fair enough, but the offer stands. No questions asked. I looked at myself in the 3-way mirror, at the woman wearing a dress that cost more than some people's rent. She looked confident, elegant, and worthy of good things. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I deserved something beautiful after the morning I'd had. Why? I asked. Why would you do this? Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Because I know what it's like to have someone take something that belonged to you. And I know how good it feels when a stranger decides to be kind instead of cruel. There was something in his voice, a hint of personal experience, that made his offer feel less random and more intentional. Before I could change my mind, I nodded. Okay, but I'm paying you back. No, you're not, he said firmly, but you are going to let me take you to lunch. I don't think that's... Consider it research, he interrupted. I'm a venture capitalist. I invest in people. And I have a feeling you're going to do something interesting with your life very soon. Sarah was practically vibrating with excitement. Kelly, say yes. When was the last time someone wanted to invest in you? Never, I realized. No one had ever looked at me and seen potential worth betting on. Fine, I said. Lunch, but somewhere normal, not some place where the appetizers cost more than my car payment. Deal, Alexander said, pulling out his phone, but I'm choosing the restaurant. While he handled the dress purchase with an ease that spoke of serious money, Sarah cornered me by the accessories. Do you realize what just happened? She whispered urgently. A strange man just bought me an expensive dress? A gorgeous, wealthy man just bought you an expensive dress after one look at you in it, and now he wants to take you to lunch? This is like something out of a movie. This is like something out of a cautionary tale, I corrected. Rich men don't just buy dresses for random women without expecting something in return. Maybe not, Sarah said, but you've spent your whole life playing it safe, and where has that gotten you? Your sister stole your wedding dress, your ex-fiancé is probably relieved you called it off, and your mother thinks you should be grateful for scraps. Maybe it's time to take a risk. She had a point. Everything safe and predictable in my life had just exploded spectacularly. What did I have to lose? Alexander, I called as he returned with shopping bags. I have one condition for lunch. Name it. I want to know why you really did this, and I want the truth, not some line about investing in people. His smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. Fair enough, but I warn you, it's not a particularly cheerful story. Neither is mine, I said. Maybe we're even. An hour later, we sat in a small bistro in Soho that managed to be both elegant and comfortable.
Alexander had been true to his word. The prices were reasonable, the atmosphere relaxed, but the man across from me was anything but ordinary. "So," I said, cutting into my salmon, "your turn. Why does a successful venture capitalist buy dresses for strangers?" Alexander set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "Because 6 months ago, I was supposed to get married, and 3 days before the wedding, my fiancé decided she preferred my business partner to me." Ouch. The dress she'd chosen cost $15,000. Custom designed, hand-beaded, the works. She kept it, by the way. I wore it to marry him 2 months later. I felt my stomach drop. "Your business partner?" "Former business partner. Turns out they've been planning to merge more than just companies." His smile was sharp with old pain. "So when I saw you looking at yourself in that mirror, like you couldn't believe you deserved something beautiful, I remembered how it felt to have someone take what was supposed to be yours." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That's awful." It was, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to me. "How do you figure?" "Because it showed me who I really was to her, a stepping stone to something better, a means to an end." He met my eyes across the table. "Sound familiar?" It did. It sounded exactly like Derek, like my family, like everyone who'd ever treated me like I should be grateful for whatever attention they were willing to spare. Very familiar, I admitted. The difference is, I had enough money to make their lives complicated afterward, pulled my investments, called in some favors, and made sure their new venture struggled. His expression was satisfaction mixed with regret. Not my finest moment, but effective. "What were their names?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. "Marcus Wellington and Natasha Rodriguez." The fork slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, clattering against my plate. Around us, the bistro continued its afternoon rhythm, but I felt like the world had just shifted on its axis. "You're Marcus's ex-fiancé," I said slowly, "and you're Natasha's sister." Alexander's eyes held mine steadily. "The sister who called off her wedding this morning because Natasha stole her grandmother's dress to wear to her ceremony at the plaza." "You knew?" I said. "This whole time, you knew who I was?" "I suspected when you mentioned the stolen dress. I was certain when you said your name." He leaned forward. "Kelly Rodriguez, the sister Natasha always complained about. The one she said was pathetically ordinary and desperate for attention." The words hit like physical blows. Hearing my sister's private opinions spoken aloud by a stranger was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. "So this is what, revenge?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "You're using me to get back at them?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "This is an opportunity." "I don't understand." "They're getting married today at 3 o'clock. In your grandmother's dress, at the most exclusive venue in Manhattan, surrounded by everyone who matters in their social circle." His smile was dangerous and completely compelling. "What if you showed up?" "To their wedding?" "To your own." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "Marry me, Kelly, today, right now. We'll show up at the plaza as husband and wife and let them explain to their guests why the bride is wearing a dress that belongs to the groom's new sister-in-law." The proposal was insane, impossible, and exactly the kind of dramatic gesture that would destroy Natasha's perfect day the way she'd destroyed mine. It was also completely crazy. "You're serious," I said. "Completely. We can get a license, find an officiant, and be legally married within 2 hours, just in time to crash their reception." "But we don't even know each other." "We know enough," Alexander said. "We know we've both been discarded by people who thought they could do better. We know we're both tired of being underestimated. And we know they deserve to face some consequences for what they did." I thought about Natasha's face that morning, the casual cruelty with which she dismissed my feelings. I thought about Marcus, the man who'd apparently been cheating on his fiancée with my sister. I thought about my mother's quick calculation about which daughter's happiness mattered more. "This is insane," I said. "Completely," Alexandra agreed. "But what do you have to lose?" "Everything," I thought. But then again, I'd already lost everything that morning. My wedding, my fiancé, my family's respect, my faith in the people I'd trusted most. Maybe it was time to gain something back. If we do this, I said slowly, what happens after? When the revenge is complete and the shock wears off? We figure it out as we go, Alexander said. No expectations, no pressure. Just two people who decided to take control of their own story instead of letting other people write it for them. I looked around the bistro, at couples sharing quiet lunches and friends catching up over wine. Normal people living normal lives, making normal choices. I'd tried normal. Normal had gotten me Derek and a community center wedding and a family who thought I should be grateful for scraps. Maybe it was time to try something extraordinary. Okay, I said, let's get married. Alexander's smile was brilliant. Really? Really, but we're doing this right. If I'm going to crash my sister's wedding, I'm going to look absolutely perfect doing it. I was hoping you'd say that, he said, signaling for the check, because I know exactly where to get you a wedding dress that will make your grandmother's costume look like a costume. For the first time in hours, I smiled back. Lead the way, future husband. 2 hours later, I stood in the most exclusive bridal boutique in Manhattan, watching a seamstress make final adjustments to a dress that cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. The gown was everything my grandmother's dress wasn't. Modern, sleek, devastatingly elegant. Where grandma's dress whispered of vintage romance, this one declared war in silk and diamonds. Perfect, Alexander said from behind me, his voice carrying a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with what it represented. Natasha won't know what hit her. The boutique owner, a razor-sharp woman named Vivian, who'd somehow produced a couture wedding gown on 2 hours' notice, circled me like a predator evaluating her handiwork. The alterations are flawless. You look like you were born to wear Valentino. I stared at my reflection, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at me. The dress transformed me into someone powerful, someone who belonged in penthouses and first-class cabins, someone who could walk into the Plaza Hotel and own every room she entered. How did you manage this? I asked Alexander, gesturing at the dress, the private boutique appointment, the seamstress who'd appeared like magic to ensure perfect fit. Don't these places usually require months of appointments? Money opens doors, he said simply, and Vivian owed me a favor. I helped finance her expansion into Los Angeles last year. Of course he had. I was beginning to understand that Alexander's world operated on an entirely different level than mine, one where impossible things became possible with the right connections and enough zeros in your bank account. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Please tell me you haven't been kidnapped by a charming stranger. I'm worried and excited in equal measure. I typed back quickly. Still alive, getting married in an hour. We'll explain later. Her response was immediate. What? The marriage license was surprisingly easy to obtain, Alexander said, consulting his watch. Judge Morrison will meet us at the courthouse in 30 minutes. She's an old family friend. Another favor you're calling in? Something like that. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Are you having second thoughts? I considered the question seriously. Was I making the biggest mistake of my life? Probably. Was I about to marry a man I'd known for less than 4 hours? Definitely. Did I care? No second thoughts, I said, but I do have questions. Shoot. What happens after today, after we've had our revenge and proved whatever point we're trying to prove? Alexander was quiet for a moment, adjusting his cufflinks in a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a nervous habit. Honestly, I don't know. We could get the marriage annulled quietly in a few weeks. Or we could see what happens when two people who've been underestimated their whole lives decide to stop playing by other people's rules. That's not exactly a traditional marriage proposal. Nothing about this situation is traditional, but that doesn't mean it can't work. He met my eyes in the boutique mirror. Kelly, I've spent the last 6 months analyzing what went wrong with Natasha. You want to know what I figured out? Tell me. I was never myself around her.
I was whatever version of Alexander Hawthorne she wanted me to be. Successful, yes, but also predictable, safe. The kind of man who would give her the life she thought she deserved without challenging her to become more than she already was. I understood exactly what he meant. Derek and I were the same way. We enabled each other's mediocrity. Exactly. But this, he gestured between us, this is different. We're both choosing to be here. No settling, no compromising ourselves to fit into someone else's idea of what we should be. Vivian reappeared with a jewelry box. The final touch, she announced, lifting out a necklace that made my breath catch. Diamonds and sapphires, arranged in an intricate pattern that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. Alexander, this is too much, I started to protest. It's borrowed, he said quickly, from Tiffany's, part of their private collection. They occasionally loan pieces for special occasions. And this qualifies as a special occasion? A Hawthorne wedding, absolutely, especially when the bride is about to become the talk of Manhattan society. The weight of the necklace against my throat felt like armor, another layer of transformation, from ordinary Kelly into someone capable of walking into the plaza and facing down my sister without flinching. Vivian handed me a small clutch bag. Everything you need, she said with a conspiratorial smile. Lipstick for touch-ups, tissues for tears, whether happy or vindictive, and breath mints for your new husband. Thank you, I said, meaning it. This is incredible. Darling, every woman deserves to feel like a queen on her wedding day, even if it's a revenge wedding. Alexander offered me his arm. Ready to become Mrs. Hawthorne? The courthouse ceremony was surreal in its efficiency. Judge Morrison, an elegant woman in her 60s, performed the service with the kind of practiced warmth that suggested she'd married dozens of couples in her chambers over the years. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at Alexander that spoke of genuine affection, not just professional courtesy. Alexander, I have to say, this is quite a surprise, she said as we signed the marriage certificate. When you called this morning, I thought perhaps you were joking. No joke, Judge Morrison, just excellent timing.
She turned to me with a smile that was both welcoming and slightly concerned. Kelly, I've known this young man since he was 16. He's impulsive, stubborn, and has a tendency to make dramatic gestures when he's been hurt. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? Absolutely not, I said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. Good answer, she laughed. Some of the best marriages start with a healthy dose of uncertainty. It keeps things interesting. 20 minutes later, we emerged from the courthouse as husband and wife, armed with an official marriage certificate and a plan that felt increasingly audacious with each passing moment. So, Mrs. Hawthorne, Alexander said as we climbed into the back of a sleek black car, how does it feel to be married to a complete stranger? Terrifying and exhilarating, I admitted, though I should probably know more about my husband than his name and his excellent taste in revenge plots. Fair point. What would you like to know? Everything. Start with the basics. As our driver navigated Manhattan traffic toward the plaza, Alexander sketched the outline of his life. Harvard MBA, inherited wealth that he'd multiplied through careful investments, a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, and a business empire built on identifying promising startups before anyone else saw their potential. I was 28 when I met Natasha, he said, his voice carefully neutral. She was working at Goldman Sachs, brilliant and beautiful and absolutely ruthless in negotiations. I thought I'd found someone who could match my ambition. What changed? Marcus Wellington happened. Old money trumped new money, apparently. Marcus could offer her connections to families whose names appeared in history books, not just Forbes lists. I was successful, but Marcus was legacy. And now? Now, Marcus is about to discover that stealing my fiancé was the most expensive mistake he's ever made. Wellington Industries has been struggling since their European expansion failed last year. They needed my investment to stay afloat. A cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. They won't be getting it. I studied his profile as we stopped at a red light. You're not just after Natasha, are you? This is about destroying both of them. They destroyed my faith in people I trusted. Seems only fair to return the favor. He turned to look at me. Does that bother you? I thought about Natasha's casual cruelty that morning, the way she dismissed my feelings like they were inconvenient obstacles to her perfect day. I thought about Marcus, charming and handsome, and apparently willing to betray his fiancée for a better social connection. No, I said, it doesn't bother me at all. The Plaza Hotel rose before us like a fairy tale castle, its limestone facade gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Valets rushed to open car doors, doormen bowed with practiced elegance, and everything about the scene screamed old-world luxury and new money excess. Remind me again why we're not just posting wedding photos on social media and calling it a day, I asked as Alexander helped me out of the car. Because social media is passive revenge. This is active. This is walking into their perfect moment and proving that they didn't win. They just delayed the inevitable. And what's the inevitable? That people like your sister and Marcus eventually have to face consequences for treating other people like disposable objects. We paused at the hotel entrance, and I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the gleaming brass doors. We looked like we belonged here, like the kind of power couple that graced magazine covers and charity galas. It was an illusion, but a compelling one. Last chance to back out, Alexander said quietly. Once we walk through those doors, there's no going back. Your family will know you married a stranger out of spite. Manhattan society will be talking about this for months, and Natasha will never forgive you. Good, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. I'm tired of being forgettable. I'm tired of being the sister who gets overlooked and underestimated. If they're going to remember me, I want them to remember this moment. Then let's give them something to remember. Alexander offered me his arm, and together we walked through the doors of the Plaza Hotel. The lobby was a masterpiece of marble and gold, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow patterns across walls that had witnessed a century of New York's most exclusive events. The Wellington Rodriguez wedding reception is in the terrace room, Alexander said to the concierge, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was exactly where he belonged. Of course, mister. Hawthorne, Mr. and Mrs. Alexander Hawthorne. The concierge's eyes widened slightly. Apparently, the Hawthorne name carried weight even here. Congratulations on your recent nuptials, sir. The terrace room is just through those doors. As we approached the reception hall, I could hear the sounds of celebration. Laughter, clinking glasses, a string quartet playing something classical and elegant. The sounds of Natasha's perfect wedding reception, the event she'd stolen my dress to make possible. Ready? Alexander asked. I adjusted the borrowed diamonds at my throat, smoothed the silk of my couture gown, and thought about the woman I'd been this morning. Small, apologetic, grateful for scraps. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who refused to be overlooked. Let's crash a wedding, I said. The doors to the terrace room opened, and we stepped into my sister's worst nightmare. The terrace room was everything I'd expected from Natasha's perfect wedding. Crystalline chandeliers casting prismatic light across cream silk linens, towering arrangements of white roses and peonies, and enough elegance to make my community center reception look like a high school cafeteria party. 200 guests in designer attire mingled around cocktail cables, their conversations creating the sophisticated hum of Manhattan's social elite. And there, at the center of it all, stood my sister in my grandmother's crest. Even from across the room, I could see how perfectly the vintage gown fit her tall, model-thin frame. The ivory silk seemed to glow against her porcelain skin, and the delicate pearl beading caught the light with every movement. She looked exactly like the bride she'd always dreamed of being. Radiant, elegant, and completely unaware that her perfect day was about to implode. She does look beautiful, Alexander murmured beside me, his voice carrying no trace of his former feelings. Too bad about her personality. Marcus stood next to her, resplendent in a custom tuxedo, accepting congratulations from a group of men who looked like they'd stepped out of a private equity prospectus. He was objectively handsome, the kind of classic good looks that spoke of generations of careful breeding and expensive orthodontics. But knowing what I knew now, I could see the calculating coldness behind his charming smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne," the maitre d' announced, in a voice that somehow carried across the entire room without seeming to shout. The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Every head in the room turned toward us, and I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes taking in my appearance. The couture gown, the borrowed diamonds, the man whose arm I held. But it was Natasha's face that made the entrance worthwhile. Her expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and pure horror in the space of 3 seconds. The champagne flute slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to echo through the stunned silence. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that Alexander Hawthorne? Who's the woman with him? Did they say Mrs. Hawthorne?" Marcus's reaction was slower but no less dramatic. His face went ashen as he recognized his former business partner and ex-fiancé walking into his wedding reception arm in arm with another woman, a woman wearing a wedding dress that clearly hadn't come from a discount rack. "Kelly?" My mother's voice cut through the murmur of confused guests. She stood near the head table, wearing the navy dress she'd bought specifically for Natasha's wedding, her face a mask of bewilderment. "What are you doing here? I thought you canceled your—" Her voice trailed off as she took in my appearance, the obvious expense of my gown, the confidence in my posture. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder getting here from the courthouse." If the announcement of our names had been a bomb, the word courthouse was a nuclear detonation. The whispers erupted into actual conversations as guests tried to process what they were witnessing. Natasha found her voice first. "What the hell is this, Kelly?" she hissed, abandoning all pretense of bridal grace. "What are you doing here?" "Attending a wedding reception," I replied calmly. "Though I have to say, the timing is remarkable. Alexander and I literally just came from our own ceremony." "Your own?" Marcus stepped forward, his composure cracking. "Alexander, what is this? Some kind of joke?" "No joke, old friend," Alexander said, his tone conversational but carrying an edge that made several nearby guests take a step back. "Though I appreciate the invitation to your lovely reception, Kelly and I thought it would be the perfect place to celebrate our new marriage." "Marriage?" Natasha's voice climbed an octave. "You got married? To him?" She gestured at Alexander like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Technically, he married me," I corrected, though I understand the distinction might be confusing for someone who's made a career out of stealing other people's relationships. The crowd was no longer pretending not to listen. Phones had appeared, undoubtedly capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most dramatic wedding reception in Plaza Hotel history. "Kelly Rodriguez Hawthorne," I continued, savoring the way Natasha flinched at my new name. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" "You're insane," Natasha sputtered. "Both of you. This is my wedding day." "Yes, I can see that," I said, my gaze moving pointedly to the dress she wore. "Lovely gown. It looks familiar." For the first time since we'd entered, Natasha seemed to remember that she was wearing my grandmother's dress to insult me. Her hand flew to the pearl beading at her throat, a gesture that might have been protective if it wasn't so clearly guilty. "This dress belongs in this family," she said, defensively, "at a wedding that actually matters." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "It does belong in this family, which is why I'll be expecting it back, cleaned and pressed, by tomorrow morning." "Like hell." "Actually," Alexander interjected smoothly, "as Kelly's husband, I believe I have some legal standing in this matter.
The dress was specifically bequeathed to my wife. Taking it without permission could be considered theft. Marcus finally seemed to shake off his shock enough to attempt damage control. Alexander, surely we can discuss this privately. There's no need to create a scene. A scene? Alexander's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus, you stole my fiancé, attempted to destroy my business partnerships, and were now wearing stolen property at your wedding. I'd say the scene was created months ago. I didn't steal anything, Marcus protested, though his voice lacked conviction. Natasha chose me. After you offered her something I couldn't, Alexander finished, a trust fund that predates the American Revolution, and a family name that opens doors mine can't, I understand the appeal. The crowd was eating this up. I could see phones recording, society photographers who'd been hired to capture the wedding, now documenting its spectacular implosion. By tomorrow morning, this would be the lead story in every gossip column in the city. What I don't understand, Alexander continued, is why you thought there wouldn't be consequences. Consequences? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Wellington Industries needs a $15 million injection by the end of the month to avoid defaulting on your European loans. Funny thing about that, the investor you've been counting on just married someone else. The color drained from Marcus's face completely. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Consider it a wedding gift. My mother appeared at my elbow, her expression cycling between shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been pride. Kelly, sweetheart, what on earth is going on? This morning you were marrying Derek, and now... Now I'm married to someone who actually values me, I said simply. Someone who saw me in a department store and decided I deserved beautiful things instead of hand-me-downs and borrowed happiness. But you barely know him. I know enough, I said, looking at Alexander with genuine affection. I know he's kind to strangers, generous with his resources, and loyal to the people who matter to him, which is more than I can say for some family members. Natasha had been growing increasingly red-faced during this exchange, and she finally exploded. This is ridiculous. You can't just show up at my wedding and what? I interrupted. Steal your thunder? Take something that belongs to you? Ruin your perfect day? I smiled sweetly. Gosh, Natasha, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? You vindictive bitch. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander's voice cut through Natasha's tirade with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. I'd like to thank the happy couple for providing such an elegant venue for celebrating my own marriage. The flowers are beautiful, the champagne is excellent, and the entertainment has been unforgettable. He raised a champagne glass that had materialized from somewhere, and several guests actually followed suit before realizing what they were doing. To second chances, to people who know their worth, and to marriages built on mutual respect rather than mutual convenience. The toast hung in the air like a challenge. Some guests drank awkwardly, others stared, and a few had the grace to look embarrassed by the entire spectacle. This isn't over, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying enough venom to penetrate the crowd noise. Oh, but it is, Alexander replied calmly. It's been over since the moment you decided that stealing from me wouldn't have consequences. The only question now is how much collateral damage you're willing to accept. What's that supposed to mean? Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Marcus the screen. The Wall Street Journal is running a story tomorrow about Wellington Industries' financial difficulties and the failed merger talks with Hawthorne Capital. Purely factual, of course, but timing is everything in business. Marcus lunged forward, but several guests caught him before he could reach Alexander. You bastard! You can't destroy my family's company over a woman. I'm not destroying it over a woman, Alexander said calmly. I'm destroying it because you're a poor businessman who makes decisions with his ego instead of his brain. Natasha was just the catalyst. The reception had devolved into complete chaos. Guests were openly filming, wedding staff were trying to restore order, and Natasha was standing in the middle of it all in my grandmother's dress, looking like her perfect world was crumbling around her. Which, to be fair, it was. Kelly, she said, her voice suddenly small and desperate, please, don't do this to me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the casual cruelty in her voice that morning, the way she dismissed my feelings like they were irrelevant to her happiness. "You did this to yourself, Natasha," I said quietly. "You could have asked to borrow the dress. You could have postponed your ceremony. You could have shown even a shred of consideration for your sister on what was supposed to be her wedding day." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was just—" "Too late," I said. "Much too late."
Alexander offered me his arm again. "Shall we go, Mrs. Hawthorne? I believe we have a honeymoon to begin." As we walked toward the exit, the crowd parted before us like we were royalty. The last thing I heard before the doors closed behind us was the sound of Natasha crying and my mother trying desperately to salvage what remained of the reception. "That," Alexander said as we stepped into the elevator, "was even better than I imagined." "Is it terrible that I enjoyed every second of it?" I asked. "If it is, then we're both terrible," he replied, "and I'm completely fine with that." The elevator doors closed, and for the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. We'd done it. We'd walked into their perfect moment and proven that actions have consequences, that stealing from people has a price, and that sometimes the best revenge is living well enough to make your enemies realize what they've lost. Now all we had to do was figure out what came next. 6 months later, I stood in the penthouse apartment that had somehow become home, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and pink. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, Central Park stretching endlessly below, the city awakening to another day of possibilities. A year ago, I could never have imagined living somewhere like this, being someone like this. "You're up early," Alexander's voice came from behind me, warm with sleep and affection. I turned to find him in the doorway, hair mussed and wearing the Columbia Law sweatshirt he'd had since college. 6 months of marriage had taught me that, despite his polished public image, Alexander was actually remarkably normal in private. He left dishes in the sink, sang off-key in the shower, and had strong opinions about which coffee beans made the best espresso. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too much thinking." "About today?" Today. The day Natasha's divorce would be finalized. The day the last remnants of her perfect life would officially crumble into legal documentation and asset division. "Among other things," I said, accepting the coffee he handed me. Real Italian espresso, perfectly prepared, one of the many small luxuries I was still adjusting to. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of consequences and revelations. Within a week of our Plaza Hotel confrontation, 3 major gossip magazines had run features on "The Wedding Crash Heard Round Manhattan." Alexander and I had become minor celebrities in certain circles, the revenge couple who'd turned a society wedding into a public spectacle. But the real fallout had been far more serious than tabloid coverage. Marcus's business empire had collapsed even faster than Alexander had predicted. The Wall Street Journal expose had triggered a cascade of investor withdrawals, and within a month, Wellington Industries had filed for bankruptcy protection. The family's Long Island estate had been seized by creditors, their art collections sold at auction, and Marcus himself was facing federal charges for securities fraud. "It's almost sad," I'd told Alexander after reading the latest news coverage. "His family built that company over 4 generations." "His family built it honestly," Alexander had replied. "Marcus destroyed it with shortcuts and lies. I just made sure the consequences happened faster." Natasha's marriage had lasted exactly 73 days. When Marcus's money evaporated, so did his interest in playing the devoted husband. The divorce proceedings had been vicious and public, with both sides hiring aggressive attorneys and leaking unflattering stories to the press. My sister had gone from society bride to cautionary tale in less than 3 months. I should have felt more satisfaction watching their downfall. Instead, I mostly felt relieved that I was no longer part of that toxic dynamic. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, joining me at the window. It was a question he'd asked several times over the past months, always with a slight tension in his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely sure of my answer. About revenge? No, I said honestly. About marrying you? That's more complicated. His face was carefully neutral. He waited for me to continue. I don't regret marrying you, I said slowly, but I sometimes wonder who we might have been if we'd met under different circumstances, if our relationship had been built on something other than mutual damage and a desire for payback. Do you think it would have been better? I considered the question seriously. Over the past 6 months, Alexander and I had developed a relationship that defied easy categorization. We weren't exactly traditional newlyweds. We maintained separate bedrooms, separate finances, and a careful respect for each other's independence. But we'd also become genuine friends, conspirators, and partners in ways I'd never experienced before. Different, I said finally, but not necessarily better. We both needed to prove we were worth more than how other people treated us. Maybe we couldn't have done that separately. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Coffee later? I have news. Sarah had become Alexander's biggest supporter once she'd gotten over the shock of my impulsive marriage. He makes you laugh, she'd observed after our first double date. Derek never made you laugh. She was right. Alexander challenged me in ways Derek never had, encouraged ambitions I'd never dared voice, and treated my opinions like they mattered. He'd also insisted on adding my name to several of his investment accounts. In case you decide you want out, he'd said, I never want you to feel trapped by money the way Natasha was. What do you think Sarah's news is? Alexander asked, reading over my shoulder. Knowing Sarah, either she's pregnant, engaged, or she's decided to quit her job and become a professional dog walker. My money's on me. She's been practically glowing since she started dating that professor. We'd settled into this kind of easy domesticity, sharing morning coffee, discussing friends' lives, making plans for the day ahead. It wasn't passionate romance, but it was something deeper, genuine partnership between two people who respected each other. The intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. Mrs. Hawthorne, there's Miss Rodriguez here to see you. Alexander and I exchanged glances. We'd had no contact with my family since the Plaza Hotel incident, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that my parents were struggling to process what had happened. Send her up, I said after a moment's hesitation. Are you sure? Alexander asked quietly. Might as well get it over with. 10 minutes later, I opened our front door to find Natasha standing in the hallway, looking like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the polished perfection I'd grown up envying. Her hair was limp, her clothes were off the rack, and she'd lost enough weight to look gaunt rather than model thin. Hello, she said quietly. Natasha. I didn't invite her in immediately, studying her face for signs of the manipulation that had always been her specialty. I brought this, she said, holding out a garment bag. Grandmother's dress, cleaned and pressed, like you asked. I took the bag, feeling the familiar weight of the silk and beading inside. Thank you. Can we talk? I stepped aside to let her enter, leading her to the living room with its stunning city views. Natasha looked around with poorly concealed envy. The custom furniture, the original artwork, the casual display of wealth that suggested generations of success rather than recent acquisition. Nice place, she said with forced lightness. Alexander has good taste. She settled uncomfortably on the edge of an Italian leather sofa. Kelly, I came to apologize. Okay? That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Natasha? That I forgive you? That we can go back to being sisters like nothing happened? I shook my head. You didn't just take my dress. You dismissed my feelings, undermined my confidence, and treated me like I was disposable. An apology doesn't fix that. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know I was terrible to you, not just that day, but for years. I was jealous. Jealous? Of what? Of how easy it was for you to be happy with simple things. Derek, your little apartment, your job, none of it was impressive. But you were content. I always needed more, always needed to prove I was better than everyone else. It was exhausting. I sat across from her, studying this version of my sister I'd never seen before. Vulnerable, reflective, genuinely remorseful. Being married to Marcus, she continued, even for those few weeks, showed me what my life would have been like. Constant competition with other wives, always performing, never being allowed to just exist. You had something real with Derek, even if it wasn't perfect. I didn't, actually, I said gently. Derek and I were settling for each other. We were both too scared to want something better. And now? I looked toward the kitchen, where Alexander was giving us privacy while staying close enough to intervene if needed. Now I have something real, not perfect, but honest, built on respect instead of desperation. Natasha followed my gaze. Do you love him? It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. Did I love Alexander? Or was I grateful to him? Was there a difference? I'm learning to, I said honestly. Love takes time when it's real. What I had with Derek was comfortable familiarity. What Marcus offered you was social advancement. What Alexander and I have is possibility. I'm sorry, Natasha said again, and this time I heard genuine pain in her voice. I'm sorry for taking your dress, for ruining your wedding day, for treating you like you didn't matter. You deserved better from me. Yes, I said simply, I did. Is there any chance we could start over? Not forget what happened, but maybe find a way to be family again? I considered her request carefully. The old Kelly would have immediately forgiven her, grateful for any scraps of sisterly affection. But I'd learned the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Maybe, I said finally, but it would have to be different. I'm not going to apologize for my success or make myself smaller to make you comfortable. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be as equals. I'd like that, she said softly. It might take time. I have time. I'm starting therapy, trying to figure out who I am when I'm not competing with everyone around me. She managed a weak smile. Turns out, I have no idea. After Natasha left, Alexander emerged from the kitchen with fresh coffee and a questioning look. How do you feel? He asked. Surprisingly okay, I realized. 6 months ago, seeing her like that would have made me want to fix everything, take care of her, make it better. Now I just feel sad for her, but not responsible for her. That's growth. Is it terrible that I'm grateful this all happened? The dress theft, the humiliation, even marrying you out of spite? Alexander laughed. If it's terrible, then we're both monsters. But I don't think it is. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things in our lives. Speaking of which, I said, settling beside him on the sofa, I've been thinking about our arrangement. Oh? The separate bedrooms, the careful distance, the treating this like a business partnership with benefits. I turned to face him fully. I think I'm ready for it to be more. More like what? More like a real marriage. More like two people who choose each other every day, instead of two people who got married for revenge and decided to make the best of it. Are you proposing to me, Mrs. Hawthorne? I'm proposing we have a real wedding, I said. Something that's ours, not a reaction to other people's choices. Somewhere beautiful, with people who actually care about us, wearing dresses we chose instead of stole. I'd like that, Alexander said, leaning closer. Though I have one condition. What's that? We will honeymoon somewhere tropical this time. I'm tired of Manhattan winters. Deal, I laughed, and kissed my husband properly for the first time. 6 months later, we renewed our vows on a beach in Santorini, surrounded by friends who'd become family and family who'd learned to respect boundaries. I wore a dress I'd chosen myself, simple, elegant, and entirely mine. Alexander's eyes never left my face during the ceremony, and when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife again, it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. Sarah was right. He did make me laugh. But more than that, he made me believe I deserved to be chosen, cherished, and celebrated. As for Natasha, she sent a beautiful arrangement of white roses with a note that simply said, "Congratulations on your real wedding. Love, your sister." It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's building a life so beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant. And as I danced with my husband under the Greek stars, wearing a dress no one could steal, and surrounded by love no one could take away, I realized that's exactly what we'd done. The girl who'd been mocked, overlooked, and betrayed was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth and had found someone who recognized it too. Sometimes the worst day of your life leads to the best decision you ever make. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly worth. And sometimes, just sometimes, the perfect revenge is living happily ever after. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.